The train exhaled like an old mule, hissing into stillness. Dust curled around the iron wheels as the last passenger stepped down. Her boots, soft-soled and scuffed, sank slightly into the dirt. She stood there a long moment, as if the land itself might offer some answer. She wore blue, a dress that once held a dream stitched into its hem. A ribbon cinched her waist, though it didn't hide her size, and her hat was pinned low to shade her eyes from stares. She had arrived with a name, a letter of promise, and a satchel filled with embroidered linens and lavender soap, things a wife would bring. But no man came forward. The station was a single wooden building with a warped roof and a rusted bell. Beyond it lay a town too small for secrets and too cruel for mercy. Children threw stones at a tin can. A dog barked without interest. The sky stretched vast and white blue overhead, without a cloud to lean on. She clutched the letter again, now smudged and soft at the fold. "You will know me by the green scarf I wear. I'll be waiting just after noon," it read. Noon had passed. The scarf was nowhere. Old Tom, the station master, looked up from his ledger. "Miss?" he asked, voice gentle by years and sympathy. She nodded once, her throat too tight for reply. "Don't reckon he's comin'," he said at last. Not cruel, just plain spoken. She turned her face toward the horizon, pretending she hadn't heard. Her cheeks burned. "Not from sun." "Can I leave my trunk?" she asked after a time. Her voice was soft and low, like someone trained not to take up space. He nodded toward the inn. "You'll find Miss Emmeline 2 streets over. She's got rooms if you got coin." She thanked him, though the word scraped. The trunk was heavy, but she did not ask for help. She dragged it behind her like an anchor, wheels rattling over dirt and stone. People watched from windows. She could feel them. She could always feel them. They didn't whisper loud enough for her to hear, but that was the thing about shame. It didn't need words to bloom. At the inn, Miss Emmeline stood at the door with a broom in her hands and calculation in her eyes. "I'll need a room," the woman said, shoulders back, though her dress was damp beneath her arms. "Just for a few nights." Emmeline looked her up and down, eyes lingering on her roundness like it was a crime. "A husband late or lost?" she asked. "Neither," she said. "Then you'll pay in advance." She placed 2 silver coins on the rail. The room was small and smelled of dust and old wood, but it was clean. There was a basin, a bed, and a cracked mirror that showed her only in halves. She sat on the bed. The mattress sighed. So did she. In the dining hall that night, she sat in the corner. The stew was thin but hot, and she ate slowly, holding her spoon like it might shatter. Men played cards near the fire. Women spoke low over their stitching. No one invited her in. Del Mosley, already half-drunk, leaned too far in his chair and pointed her way with a laugh. "Must have been some mistake. Ain't no man asked for that on purpose." The laughter came slow but sure, like coals catching. She did not respond. She lowered her head, sipped her broth. But inside her something folded. Not broke, not yet, but folded. Later, in her room, she stood before the mirror and studied her own shape. Full hips, round arms, the soft swell of her belly under the corset that dug into her ribs. She unhooked it, let it fall. Her skin sighed with relief. She touched her stomach, where once she'd hoped life would grow. Nothing ever had. That man, the one who'd written the letter, had called her handsome in a soft sort of way. Said he wanted a wife who could cook, keep warm, and maybe raise children. She'd sent him her picture. She had not lied, but perhaps her smile had been too bold. She lay down with her back to the door. The window let in moonlight that painted her hands silver. She laced her fingers over her chest and imagined, just for a moment, that she was loved. At dawn, she dressed slowly. The mirror did not change overnight, but she looked longer today, not in hope, but in truth. Her body was hers. It had endured. She walked again to the station, though no letter had said he might come today. Still, something in her moved her feet toward waiting. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the ache of unfinished hope. Old Tom was already sweeping the platform. He tipped his hat. "Still no green scarf," he said gently. She nodded and sat on the bench. The morning was cool. The breeze carried the scent of sage and horses. She watched a cloud of swallows wheel over the roof of the church. Their wings caught the light like glass. Minutes passed. Then more. A group of riders approached from the west, 5 in all. One man peeled off, leading a dun horse and riding like someone used to long silences. His coat was brown, his hat wide. A rifle was strapped to his saddle. He reined in slowly and looked straight at her. She met his eyes. He did not smile, but he looked, truly looked, like he saw more than shape. "You waiting for someone, ma'am?" he asked, voice low, cracked like riverstone. She hesitated. "Yes." He nodded, dismounted, dusted off his gloves. His boots were caked in red dirt. His hands were large, calloused, clean. He walked closer, took a long breath, then said something so quiet, the air itself seemed to hush to hear it. "You're my wife now, if you want to be." The world did not pause. Birds still sang. Dust still danced in sunbeams. But inside her, something shifted. She blinked, looked up. He didn't touch her, didn't pressure, just waited, like a man offering a glass of water and willing to walk on if she refused. From the porch of the inn, Miss Emmeline stared openly. A boy darted past them, barefoot, carrying a chicken. The woman rose, slow and unsure. Her heart beat louder than it had in weeks. "Why would you say that?" she asked. "Because you deserve to be chosen," he said simply. "And I got no one waiting back home but ghosts." She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no. He picked up her trunk with ease, slung it into his saddlebag. Then he offered his hand, and she, breath held and soul trembling, took it. As the horse moved beneath her, she looked back only once, at the station, the town, the cracked mirror in her room. Then she faced forward, toward dust, toward the unknown, toward something like the first page of her own story. And far behind her, the train sighed again, as if letting her go. The trail stretched out in quiet folds of dust and golden grass, bending with the shape of the land and the slow gait of a dun-colored horse. She sat behind the saddle, her skirt tucked close to her legs, holding tight to the rolled blanket he'd offered. The man hadn't said much since they left town, only pointed west, toward the low hills and far silence. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of it all, the suddenness, the risk, the raw mercy. No one had ever offered her anything without expectation. No one had ever looked at her and seen a future that didn't hinge on what she could give or lose. He rode ahead, not far, glancing back just enough to keep her in his line of sight. His movements were precise but unhurried, like someone who measured his words the same way he measured his steps. When they stopped for water at a stream, he handed her a tin cup without comment. She drank, careful not to spill. He drank after her without wiping the rim. It startled her more than any gesture so far. The quiet trust of it. "Name's Rhett Callahan," he said finally, sitting on a rock near the edge of the creek, sun angling through the cottonwoods. "I run cattle. Land's up past that ridge. Not much, but it holds." She nodded, unsure what he expected in return. She didn't offer her name. It didn't feel ready to be spoken aloud. Not yet. He didn't press. "Wasn't looking for a wife," he added. "Not since long while." He rubbed a thumb over a scar at his wrist. "But when I saw you sitting there, alone like that, something about it didn't sit right. Felt like a thing that needed fixing." Her voice cracked from disuse. "I don't need fixing." His head turned toward her, slowly. "Didn't say you did. I said the world around you was broke." She looked away. The stream moved over stones with a soft clatter, like whispered apologies. In the water's mirror, she saw her own face beside his weathered and still, hers round and uncertain. "Why'd you say it?" she asked. "At the station. You're my wife now." "You didn't know me." "I didn't have to," he said. "I knew what I was looking at." "And what was that?" He took a breath and let it out slow. A woman who'd been left, not because she lacked anything, but because the fool who left her didn't have eyes worth a damn. She swallowed, the words catching like dry bread. No one had spoken like that to her before. Not even her mother. Not even in prayer. They rode again as the light stretched long and gold across the fields. He didn't look back to check if she followed. He just rode as though he trusted she would. By evening, The homestead came into view, 3 weather-worn structures crouched among cottonwoods. A windmill turned slowly. Chickens scratched near the fence line. Smoke trailed from a chimney that hadn't seen warmth in weeks. He dismounted first, tied the reins, then helped her down. His touch was brief, strong, and unafraid. She expected him to lead her inside, to stake some claim. But instead, he walked toward the barn and said, "Take the bigger room. Didn't build it for myself." She stood in the yard alone for a moment, heart drumming. Then she entered the house. Inside, the wood was old but clean. A worn rug covered the floor. A kettle sat cold on the stove. On the shelf by the hearth, there was a small wooden carving of a bird with wings tucked close, its head bowed. She ran her fingers over the frame of the doorway. The quiet here wasn't empty. It was listening. That night, they ate in silence at a small table, passing beans and cornbread between them. He prayed over the food, simple and soft-spoken. She didn't close her eyes, only watched his hands. They were steady. They'd never struck anything weaker than fence post, she thought. When the wind rose, he brought in an extra blanket and set it at her door. He didn't knock, didn't linger, just placed it there and walked away. She pressed it to her chest before sleeping, breathing in the scent of wood smoke and dust. Over the next few days, she moved like a shadow, learning to be real. She swept the floor, found flour in a tin, baked flatbread with the fire he showed her to build. She fed the chickens. When she reached into the nest for eggs, she didn't flinch when the hen pecked her. She laughed instead, a small, startled sound, like something not used to being free. He brought her kindling without asking, left tools where she could find them, never once crossed her space uninvited. She noticed the way he walked, like a man with history in his boots. He didn't smile much, but when he did, it reached his eyes. One morning, she caught him watching her knead dough, his arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You work like you mean it," he said. "Wasn't much else to do back home," she replied. "You call that place home?" She paused, hands deep in flour. "I suppose not anymore." He nodded, as if that made sense to him. "Then maybe it's time you found one." One night, while sweeping the porch, she asked, "Why do you live out here alone?" He leaned against the post, lit a pipe. "Tried the world's company once. Didn't hold." "Wife?" He nodded. "Jess. Died after winter came too hard. Took the baby with her." She let silence sit between them, a long companion. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," he said. "Just means I know what it looks like, losing something before it ever really became yours." She thought of her womb, the flat ache of it. How she'd never felt the flutter of life inside, never heard the word mama spoken to her. She hadn't said it aloud, not even to herself, but she felt it now. He'd seen that absence in her and hadn't turned away. "You don't ask for much," she said. "I ask for what matters. And I listen." A storm rolled through on the third day. Wind howled against the shutters, and rain drummed on the roof like hooves. They stayed inside. He read from a worn Bible. She darned a hole in her stocking. The fire cracked. For a while, they were just two souls inside warmth, listening to the world rage outside. When the power flickered in the storm's wake, he handed her a lantern. "I'll go check the barn. You'll catch your death." He paused, half smiling. "And here I thought you might miss me." It startled her, how the joke didn't cut but curled around her like a warm shawl. She smiled despite herself, and the room felt less like shelter and more like haven. By the end of the week, she had unpacked. Not all the way, but enough to line the drawers with her hand-stitched linens. She placed her lavender soap by the basin. She brushed her hair before bed and didn't hide from her reflection. That evening, she stood at the porch with a tin cup of warm milk. Rhett stepped out beside her. The moon rose soft behind the cottonwoods. "I was never going to be enough for the last man," she said. "He wanted something I couldn't give. Not ever." He didn't ask what. He just looked at her, really looked, like the prairie looks at rain. "Maybe you were meant to give something different," he said. "And maybe I was meant to notice." She turned her face toward the wind, heart aching with unfamiliar peace. And though the world beyond the fence still judged, still whispered and mocked and moved on without apology, she stood beside this man, not owned, not taken, but chosen. And that made all the difference. The days gathered themselves like dust along the windowsills, soft, steady, unannounced. She rose with the light, wrapped her hair in a faded cloth, and tied her apron with fingers that remembered tasks long left dormant. The rhythm of the ranch began to hum in her bones. Feed the hens, knead the dough, sweep the floorboards, where the wind carried in whispers of the outside world. Rhett rose before her most mornings. She'd catch the scent of coffee and hear the porch boards creak as he moved about in the gray hush. He left things behind when he passed. Fresh kindling near the stove, water drawn into the basin, boots arranged not to clatter. Not once did he enter her space without need. That she noticed. That she remembered. There was a gentleness in the house now, the kind that crept in slowly like warmth from an oven, never loud, but present. In silence, they built a kind of language. He fixed the barn roof. She stitched the curtains. He showed her how to mend a saddle strap. She showed him how to stretch flour when supplies ran low. They never said what they were doing, but they did it together, like people who'd both run out of explanations and found comfort in the doing. One morning, while cleaning the shelf above the hearth, she found a small wooden toy, a horse carefully whittled, with chipped legs and a mane carved in rough strokes. It fit in her palm like a secret. Rhett came in from the yard, arms dusted in sawdust. She didn't hide the toy, just held it. He looked at it, then at her. "I made that for her," he said. She waited. She never held it. Born too early. His voice didn't crack, it just thinned, like paper worn soft from handling. Jess picked the name, Ruthie. She set the toy back with care, not as if returning a relic, but as if granting it rest. He didn't speak the rest of the evening. He didn't need to. She didn't either. Some wounds didn't heal through conversation. Some just needed space. Later, as she was baking, the scent of rising bread filled the house, full and golden. He passed through the kitchen and paused. "You bake like you mean it," he said, voice quiet. "Is there another way?" she replied, brushing flour from her apron. He smiled then, barely, but it lingered. A ghost of gratitude. By week's end, they had fallen into something close to comfort. She began humming when she worked, not loud, but enough to hear her own voice again. She rearranged the pantry, folded sheets, brought in herbs from the garden overgrown by time. He noticed. "You do all this because you want to," he said one night, watching her tuck away dried sage into small linen bags. "Or because you think it's what a wife should do." She paused, hands stilling over the cloth. "I do it because it feels like I belong when I do," she said. "And because no one's asked me what I want in a long time." He nodded, said nothing more. But when she woke the next morning, there was a small vase on the table. Rough clay, likely shaped by his own hands, filled with yarrow and wild clover. They never called it love. It wasn't that yet. But it was something that felt like being known. In town, people had started to murmur. Miss Emmeline sent a parcel of salt wrapped in brown paper, tied with rough string. Inside was a note, "For your table, and for your good sense. There are worse men than Callahan." Del Mosley's words echoed less now. They didn't reach as far as her fence line, and if they did, they scattered like crows before morning. Rhett fixed the south pasture gate one afternoon while she tended the hens. A rooster took to following her, pecking near her heels. She named him Admiral. Rhett called him Trouble. "He only bothers folks who ignore him," she said, tossing grain. "Sounds like someone I know," he said, and she caught the tease beneath it. She flushed, laughed, didn't look away. That night, the air turned cool. She sat on the porch steps, arms around her knees. He joined her with a mug of coffee, sat without fanfare. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked, surprising even herself. "I did once. Packed the wagon, sold the cattle. Rode 2 towns over. Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Came back." "Why?" He stared into the dusk where fireflies blinked low near the grass. "Because some ghosts follow you, but some you just have to sit with till they quiet down." She nodded. She knew the truth of that. She carried ghosts too, of empty cradles, of laughter she'd never heard, of dresses she stitched for children who never came. "You ever wish you'd chosen someone else?" she asked quietly, as if bracing herself. He looked at her, not startled, not angry. Just honest. I didn't choose you like someone picks a coat. I saw a woman sitting in silence, holding herself upright in a place built to break her. That ain't chance. That's a kind of knowing. She looked away, not to hide, but to let the words settle. They didn't speak after that. The stars came out, slow and sure. Somewhere in the dark, an owl called. She rose and went inside first. Left the door ajar behind her. Later, when he passed by her room, he paused. Said one word, "Night." And from the other side of the wall, her voice answered back, "Night." It was the first time she'd said it in years and meant it. In the morning, she found a small stack of lumber near the back of the house. He was already digging post holes. "What's this?" she asked. "Figured you might want a garden proper," he said. "If you're planning on staying." Her throat tightened. She didn't say yes, but she stepped forward and picked up a hammer. And in that quiet, dust-choked yard, they began again. Not as strangers, not yet as lovers, but as two people learning to plant things with their hands. And wait. The road into town curved like a question they hadn't dared to ask. She sat beside Rhett in the buckboard wagon, hands folded neatly in her lap, hat pinned firm against the wind. The dirt path rolled beneath the wheels, and with each creak of the axle, her stomach twisted a little tighter. It had been weeks, maybe months, though time had lost its edges, since she'd seen other faces, heard the shrill notes of gossip through cracked doorways, or smelled the sharp stink of coal smoke from the blacksmith's forge. Rhett sat steady, reins loose but sure in his hands. He hadn't said much about the trip, only that they needed salt, a new handle for the axe, and seed if any was left at the mercantile. She didn't ask why he brought her along. She only knew she wanted to come, not to prove something, just to be seen beside someone who saw her. As the first wooden shingles of the town came into view, she felt the weight of old shame rise like steam from her skin. She hadn't forgotten the last time she stood on this soil, how her boots had sunk into dust while people looked through her like glass. But she was not walking this time. She rode in with a man who hadn't once let her disappear. At the edge of town, Del Mosley leaned against a hitching post, flask in hand. His smirk came as natural as breathing. "Well, I'll be," he drawled, loud enough to be heard by everyone but pretending it was casual. Callahan found himself a soft place to land. Rhett didn't slow the wagon. "Bet she makes a warm bed, eh?" Del added, voice thick with phlegm and liquor. Rhett pulled the reins hard and stopped the wagon in a sudden shudder of dust. He climbed down with the ease of a man unshaken and walked toward Del without hurry. She didn't breathe. He didn't raise his voice, didn't draw his fists. He simply said, "You talk like that again, and I'll make sure you don't talk at all." Del blinked, half laughing, until he saw that Rhett wasn't bluffing. He stepped back, mumbling something about jokes, and vanished inside the saloon. Rhett returned to the wagon like it hadn't happened. When he offered his hand, she took it. At the mercantile, Miss Emmeline stood behind the counter, hands on her hips. Her eyes narrowed as they entered, assessing, calculating. "Well now," she said. "Didn't expect to see you two ride in together. Seems you've taken root." Rhett nodded once. "We need seed. And flour." The woman turned to her, this time without the tight-lipped smile of the innkeeper. "You cooking for him now? Or just looking to decorate the place?" She straightened her spine. "I cook. I tend. I build fences when he lets me." Miss Emmeline raised a brow. "He always take to stray things so kindly." Her hands tightened at her sides. "He doesn't take strays. He takes in what others are too blind to see." Rhett placed a gentle hand at her back, not to quiet her, not to lead, just to remind her he was there. They left the shop with sacks of grain and salt and a new kettle. On the way to the wagon, a little girl stumbled from the alley chasing a ball. The ball rolled to her feet. She knelt, picked it up, brushed off the dirt, and offered it back with a small smile. The girl looked at her a long moment, then wrapped tiny arms around her waist before running off. She stood still for a heartbeat, stunned by the hug, the weightless sincerity of it. Later, back at the homestead, she stirred stew while Rhett carved something near the fire. The sun had sunk, and the walls glowed with amber light. He worked in silence, the blade slipping through softwood, shaving curls onto the floor. When he finished, he handed it to her. It was a small figure, a woman, round and strong, holding a bundle of wheat. The face was simple, but the shape unmistakable. "For the shelf," he said. "You remind me of plenty." She held it like something sacred, too moved to answer. He cleared his throat almost shyly. "I don't know your name," he said, eyes not quite meeting hers. She froze. He hadn't asked before, hadn't needed to. But now, the space for it opened like a door. She said it, quietly, as if offering a truth from a wound that hadn't yet scabbed. He repeated it, slow, careful, like placing it on his tongue for the first time. He smiled. "It suits you." She blinked hard and looked away. They sat by the fire as the wind rose outside. The walls creaked with memory. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and stared at the figure in her hands. "I was named after no one," she said. "Then you're the first," he replied. "That makes it important." She turned toward him, warmed by more than the flames. The softest kind of quiet stretched between them. Not silence, but understanding. The next day, she placed the carved woman on the shelf beside the toy horse. Two lost things made new. In town, people had already begun to talk. Not with venom, not now. Curiosity replaced cruelty, and Emmeline's parcel of salt was only the beginning. But gossip was a shifting wind, and storm still loomed. They hadn't spoken of what they were to each other, not directly. There were no declarations, no promises carved into wood. Just hands passed across dishes, just tools shared, just glances that lingered longer each dusk. That evening, she stepped out onto the porch, watching the shadows stretch across the land. Rhett joined her, hat in hand, eyes full of quiet. "You thinking of staying?" he asked, as if it weren't already understood. She nodded. "I think I already have." He reached for her hand, didn't pull her close, just held it there between them, like a tether in a storm. And inside that small, firelit house, her name now echoed in the rafters. Not forgotten, not rejected, spoken, remembered, wanted. The rain came sudden and hard, as if the sky had been holding its breath too long. Thunder cracked over the cottonwoods and rolled down into the valley, like hooves on hollow stone. Inside the cabin, she pulled the shutters closed and pressed her palm to the window pane, feeling the tremor of the storm in the glass. Rhett was out in the barn, checking the horses. She could see the lantern flicker through the downpour, a trembling star against the dark. Her heart beat faster than the wind, not from fear of rain, but because something was changing. The air carried it. The wind knew it. She turned back to the fire and stoked it with fresh pine, the smell rising sharp and bright. The carved woman still stood on the shelf, wheat in hand, sentinel of this new life she hadn't meant to find but now could not imagine leaving. Then came the knock. Not the hesitant tap of a stranger, not the gentle rhythm of someone with manners. This was a fist against wood, loud, unkind, and familiar. She opened the door, slowly. A man stood there, drenched in the storm, hat slanted low, coat clinging to his frame like a skin he hadn't earned. His face was older than she remembered, more bitterness in the lines around his mouth. But she knew him, the man who left her at the station. He didn't wait for invitation. "Place looks smaller than I pictured," he muttered, stepping in, water pooling at his boots. "Figures you'd find some old fool to take pity." She didn't move. "Why are you here?" He looked around, sneering at the worn but clean walls, the scent of stew still lingering in the air. "Word gets around. Woman like you don't belong out here with a name like mine still hanging on you. You gave that name up the day you never showed," she said, voice level. He smiled cold and smug. "No, see, you were promised. You were paid for. That makes you mine. You leave without saying you shame me. Men don't forget shame." "I didn't leave," she whispered. "You did." He stepped closer, the storm rising behind him. "I come to collect what's mine." A voice cut through the wind before her fear could speak. "She ain't yours." Rhett stood in the doorway, soaked through, mud on his boots, rifle slung low across his back, but untouched. His eyes were dark calm, not angry, certain. The man turned, sizing him up with a half-laugh. This her hero? You think she's worth a damn? You know what you've taken in. Rhett didn't flinch. He stepped forward. Not quick. Not loud. But the room changed with every step. She's worth more than you ever saw in your whole life, he said. And you can ride out now, or I'll make sure you don't ride again. The man reached for something at his belt. Too slow. In a blur, Rhett stepped in, gripped the man's wrist, twisted. Metal clattered to the floor. The man cursed, doubled over, staggering back. Rhett didn't hit him. Didn't need to. He looked down at the man like he was something already decided. You touch her again, Rhett said, voice low and thunder-laced, and I will bury you so deep the worms won't find you. The man backed toward the door, holding his arm, drenched and small. This ain't over. It is for you. She stood frozen, heart thudding, until the sound of hooves faded into the storm's roar. Rhett closed the door quietly, latched it, and turned to her. You all right? He asked. She nodded, then shook her head. The tears came slow, not from fear but from rage, from relief, from the years she'd spent believing she had no one who'd stand between her and the world. He didn't try to hold her. He let her stand in it, rooted like something weathered but unbroken. I'm sorry, she said, voice cracking. For what? For ever thinking I wasn't worth protecting. He stepped closer, placed a hand on her shoulder. Not to claim, just to steady. You don't have to earn what you already are, he said. The fire snapped behind them. The carved woman stared into the flicker. They sat together that night, knees close, not speaking much. He offered her his hand, not for comfort, but for witness. I never asked you proper, he said after a while. And I won't if you're not ready. But I'd like you to stay. Not as a guest. Not as a kindness. But as my wife. She looked at him. Not the scars, not the sorrow, but the strength of someone who had made room for her without bending her into a shape that fit him better. I'm not perfect, she whispered. I don't want perfect, he replied. I want real. The rain softened. The roof stopped shaking. A calm crept in around the eaves, as if the storm had simply gone out to rest. She rose, went to her room, and returned with the lavender soap. She placed it in his hands. You should have something that's mine, she said. He took it like it was gold. Outside, dawn bled into the sky. Weeks later, when they rode into town again, no one whispered. Or, if they did, it wasn't loud enough to matter. Emmeline greeted her with a nod. Dell didn't look up at all. She walked with her head high, her hand in Rhett's, her name no longer hidden, but spoken freely, proudly. And when children passed, they smiled without fear. Her story wasn't one of rescue. It was one of return, to herself, to belonging, to the place where dignity began. And as she stood once more by the station bench where it had all begun, she whispered a prayer, not for the past, but for the women still waiting, still sitting with lowered eyes and hollow hope. May they too find a whisper strong enough to carry them home. Because sometimes, what saves us is not the storm passing. It's who stands beside us while it rages.